we got data, internationally comparable data, on life expectancy, maths and literacy scores, infant mortality, homicide rates, proportion of the population in prison in each country, teenage birth rates, levels of trust, obesity rates, mental illness, and that's WHO figures which include drug and alcohol addiction and social mobility. And we put them all together into one index of health and social problems, an index in which they all count equally. So where a country is on that index is influenced as much by its obesity rates as its homicide rates, as any of the others. And along the bottom here, we've got that measure of income inequality I've just shown you. More unequal countries on the right, doing consistently worse on all those measures of health and social problems. And it's an extraordinarily close relationship. It's almost like physics. You don't usually get things like this in the social world, things that tie up as closely as this. But just to just to make the point a little more strongly, if you put that same index of health and social problems, not against inequality, but going back to national income per person, there is no consistent relationship there at all. I sometimes think people feel there's a downward slope, a suggestion of a downward slope there. But I think people only think that because Portugal's there. USA is right up there. And if Portugal wasn't there, I wouldn't even suggest any relationship. And statistically, there isn't one. So all these problems closely related to inequality, but not to how rich countries are. We've done all this analysis not only on these rich developed countries, but in our book you'll find all this data again spelt out for the 50 American states. We wanted 2 test beds, not just, we were worried that people would say, well, it's just a chance finding that the rich market democracies pan out like that. So we've shown all this again on the 50 American states, showing again that the more unequal states do consistently worse on the same sort of measures. I'm not going to show you most of that data because there isn't time. We were also worried that people would think that we've just chosen problems that suit the argument. Actually, what we've done is simply take all the problems for which there is a social gradient in our societies, i.e. all the problems that you think of as most common in the poorest areas, the most deprived areas, for which we could get internationally comparable data. So basically, if we could find it, we bunged it in. But anyway, in case people did feel we were choosing our data to get this answer, we also looked at the UNICEF Index of Child Wellbeing, which has 40 different components put together by other people, nothing to do with us. It contains every aspect of child wellbeing they could get hold of measures on. So how much bullying is there in schools? Can kids talk to their parents? What are immunization rates like? How good are kids' maths and literacy scores? All that sort of data. They also have the proportion of kids in relative poverty, which is actually so close to being a measure of inequality, it's sort of inequality as applied to children, that we took that out to avoid people saying it was a circular argument. So this is the remaining 39 components of the UNICEF Index of Child Wellbeing. And again, a very striking relationship with inequality. Children do worse in more unequal societies. You're getting bored with this by now, but there's national income per person in relation to the UNICEF index. Absolutely no relationship at all. So although, if you're concerned with child welfare, and you know it's worst in the poorest areas, that is not because of the absolute standards of living in those areas. It's because of their low social status, their low income compared to others. It's more to do with feelings of low social status, inferiority, and so on. I know that there are families who run out of money for food before the next benefit, social security benefit comes in. But that's actually because of the need to participate, to look respectable, to be able to have television and a car and appear reasonably dressed and all that kind of thing. So you save on the things that appear, which don't show. You save on food in order to give your children things so they'll, not look poor in relation to other kids at school. Poorer families in England give children more pocket money than richer families, interestingly, as an indication of parents' awareness of those relativities, how important they are to children's happiness. So all this data, whether you do it for these rich countries or for the American states, and almost any measure you use, says exactly the same thing. Absolute living standards, improving them still further, no longer helps. But the differences between us matter very much indeed. Things go badly wrong with societies which are very unequal. I'm going to go through, I'll skip over that. It just shows the proportion of people in poverty in the States. They have, well, I will show you it, pretty high standards of living in absolute terms. Nearly 13% of Americans come below the federal poverty line. 80% of them have some kind of air conditioning. Nearly 80% of them have a DVD. Nearly 3/4 own a car or a truck. Down here, over a third have a dishwasher. And yet we know that in the States, all these problems that I'm going to be talking about, violence or imprisonment or drug problems, are worse than they are in other countries. Anyway, let me just run quickly through a few of the components of that index. This is always at the bottom. You're going to have income inequality with the more unequal countries on the right. This is the proportion of people who feel they can trust others in society. And it's at the most unequal end, only about 10 or 15% of the population feel they can trust others, whereas it's about 2/3 of the population feel they can trust others in the more equal societies. Really big differences. This is mental illness measured by the same diagnostic interviews that WHO put together. And you can see that in the more equal countries, it's about 7 or 8% of the population have any mental illness in the last year. Whereas in the most unequal countries, it's more like 25%. So a threefold difference in how common mental illness is in populations. By the way, all these graphs, or nearly all of them, you can download in PowerPoint from our website, the Equality Trust, as well as find them in our book. The book has the advantage that there are explanations. This is drug abuse. Again, quite a very highly significant relationship between more drug abuse in more unequal countries. Infant mortality rates. That's a sort of twofold difference. It's not such a tight relationship. Interestingly, Singapore claims to have the lowest infant mortality rates in the world. We didn't believe it, but we had to put, you can't pick and choose the data, so we put it in. We've since been told and found evidence that Singapore had a eugenics policy where uneducated women were paid to be sterilized, I think for several $1,000s. University-educated women were paid to have babies. So that's why Singapore appears there. And of course, that's dragged the regression line down a bit. And you can see if it wasn't for Singapore, you'd get a much steeper one. Anyway, what's next? Obesity, not such a tight relationship, but a sort of 2 or 3-fold difference between obesity rates according to inequality. Teenage pregnancies, this is births per 1,000 women in their teens, going from about 5 per 1,000 up to, well, up there is 40 per 1,000, but apart from the USA, there are no countries really above 30 per thousand. So maybe a 6-fold difference, but tenfold if you include the USA.